Valve is a company whose legacy is quite literally built on always succeeding. Whether through action or inaction or simply their competitors doing something stupid, Valve always seems to come out on top in any given situation. This extends beyond just general business practice. It applies to their games as well. After all, Valve's biggest failures in terms of their games haven't been the games they've made, but rather the ones they didn't. But what if I told you there was one game, one exception that proves the rule? A game that by all measurable metrics should have been a massive success. A game that even Valve failed to save, not just once, but twice. Hi, I'm Nick, and for those who may not be familiar, the first thing I need to do for this video is establish just how much of a titan Valve was and still is, but especially was at this time. From 2007 to 2013, it was banger after banger after banger. We got Portal, Team Fortress 2, Left 4 Dead 2, Portal 2, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and Dota 2. All massively successful, iconic, beloved games. Valve just genuinely seemed different from other titans of the gaming industry. They had a relatively small staff of only 250 employees, all of whom were paid incredibly well. They didn't hold themselves to any arbitrary deadlines or yearly releases. They didn't just pump out the same games and same franchises until the end of time. They were truly believed to be a company that wasn't just focused on making money, but making good games. I'm stressing this because this image will become very relevant later.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which suggestions or warnings about events to come are dropped or planted.
After this monstrous streak of games, Valve just kinda vanished for a while. From 2013 to 2017, their only release was The Lab, which was effectively just a tech demo for the newly released HTC Vive VR headset, which was made in direct collaboration with Valve. I mention all of this to set the stage. We have a Valve at the top of their game and a slight drought, just enough to get people excited. But there's something else that was going on at this time that I need to talk about. Trading card games, also known as collectible card games, were a genre introduced, popularized, and still most widely known by Magic the Gathering. Magic has been around for a long time. It was popular pretty much immediately upon its release in 1993. The game was, well, I'm gonna say simple, but it's kind of the farthest thing from that possible. A typical game of Magic involves 2 or more players who are engaged in a battle. Each player has their own personally purchased and constructed deck of cards. A player typically starts a game with a life total of 20, and loses a game when the total is reduced to 0. From here, things get a bit more complex. Early on, a lot of rules were unclear, as rules established by cards would contradict the base rules of the game. This led players to try and work around this with house rules, and you can imagine how complicated things got from there. Something that was clear though was the general functions of the cards themselves. Cards fall into 2 classes, lands and spells. Lands produce mana, and can usually only be played once per turn. The usage of a land card is signified by rotating it 90 degrees. Spells consume mana, and are used to attack your opponent. More powerful spells require larger amounts of mana. This creates a sort of scaling the longer a game goes on. As the game progresses, more lands interplay and therefore the available mana increases, allowing stronger spells to be cast. This is pretty much the simplest description I can provide for Magic's gameplay, a fact I hope properly communicates how complicated this game is. This depth would be a driving force for drawing in players, particularly through a blossoming competitive scene. This was highlighted from 2008 to 2016, when it was experiencing a bit of a second growth period. A growth period that can be measured by the roughly 20 billion cards printed in this time frame. The competitive community was a big part of this growth, as great efforts were being made to standardize play, as well as resources like the Wizards Play Network being launched, with the goal of making the organization of games and tournaments easier. Yet this wasn't the thing that Wizards of the Coast themselves primarily credit for this growth period. Instead, they would attribute it to something else they were doing during this time. That being the beginnings of expanding Magic to the digital world. In 2009, the video game Magic the Gathering: Duels of the Planeswalkers was released. The game wasn't intended to be a full-blown digitization of Magic, but rather a simplified version, intended to appeal to video gamers and hopefully act as a gateway to get them into the physical card game. Wizards described it as the arcade version of Magic, making the gameplay more accessible by removing the deck building aspect, and it worked incredibly. The game was a smash hit, and still to this day is in the top 10 most played Xbox Live titles. This game and its success would mark a major turning point. as many major game developers would see potential in this genre, specifically a company known as Blizzard Entertainment. Blizzard is mostly known for their massively successful MMORPG World of Warcraft, yet they would find themselves very interested in the success of Duels of the Planeswalkers. They saw an opportunity. You see, Wizards of the Coast made their game in an attempt to bring video game fans to their card game. Blizzard wanted to bring the card game to them. This would result in a game called Hearthstone. Set in the world of WoW, the game would take inspiration from the pre-existing World of Warcraft card game and focus their gameplay on trying to recreate the feel of a physical card game as closely as possible. In its basest form, the gameplay could be compared to Magic. Two players utilize custom-built decks with the goal of lowering their opponent's health to 0. From here though, Hearthstone keeps things much simpler. Each player has a mana bar that goes up by 1 each turn with a cap of 10. You would then use this mana to play your cards. But there are 5 different types of cards that can mostly be sorted into one of 2 categories. Minions, who will be placed directly onto the board with the ultimate goal of attacking your opponent, and spells, which are more utility focused, affecting the entire board in various ways. The other main difference from Magic was the removal of the opponent's ability to enact any manual reaction to a player's turn, something that would speed things up significantly. Another unique aspect of the game was its monetization. The game was free to play, but to get cards for your deck, you either had to earn materials through playing or buy card packs. Something worth noting with this though is that Hearthstone did not have player-to-player trading, as they wanted to avoid a free market that could potentially spiral out of control. This will be important later.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which suggestions or warnings about events to come are dropped or planted.
This game, this small, experimental game made by a team of only 15 people, would be a smash hit. Released in March of 2014, by the end of the month the game would already have 10 million registered players. By September, 20 million. By January, 25. By June of 2015, there was an estimated active player base of 8 million, just on PC, with another 9 million on mobile. There was another thing that set this game apart, something that could be credited with a large portion of the game's success. With Hearthstone's focus on accessibility, fast-paced gameplay, and online multiplayer, the game was perfect for esports. Blizzard saw this potential, holding an exhibition tournament before the game's release, and then holding the first 3 Hearthstone World Championships at BlizzCon. And this aspect of its success finally brings us back to Valve. You see, Valve was no stranger to esports. TF2 had a healthy scene, but even it paled in comparison to Dota and Counter-Strike, games that arguably had, and still have, some of the biggest esports scenes in the world. So when they were witnessing the success of Hearthstone, a digital trading card game based on a pre-existing IP that cultivated a large esports community and proceeded to rake in cash, they couldn't help but feel that they could do the same thing. But this is Valve. If they're gonna do something, they're gonna do it right. In the earlier stages of development, they brought in Scav Elias, a veteran of Wizards of the Coast who'd been working on Magic the Gathering for decades. Oh, they also brought in another Wizards employee, someone by the name of Richard Garfield. Yeah, you might know him. He just created Magic the Gathering. The team would quickly settle on making a game in the universe of Dota and began working on what would become known as Artifact. So, to recap, we have a digital TCG being developed and published by Valve, designed by the creator of Magic as well as one of its lead designers, and all under the Dota IP, a game with over 90 million active users. I won't go as far as to say this is on par with the stacked lineup of something like Silent Hill PT, but I feel like for its given community, this is pretty close. Just looking at it from this perspective, it's hard to see any world where this game wouldn't succeed. Then they revealed the game, and things were immediately off to a rocky start. Valve decided, fittingly, to announce the game at the International 2017, the esports championship for Dota 2 that Valve themselves hosted. Valve was ready to announce their return, their next major release, their next pillar, another entry in the universe of Dota, and fans weren't happy. Remember how I mentioned earlier, in passing, that Valve's biggest failures were usually considered to be the games they didn't make? Yeah, that can probably be felt here more than anywhere. Fans were not receptive of Artifact's announcement. They felt it to be incredibly disappointing, like Valve was abandoning their main series like Portal and Half-Life, all to make a card game no one asked for, all to chase a trend. Yet it wasn't all bad. Some were still open to the game, especially with Valve's stress on wanting to avoid making a pay-to-win product like many other games in the genre were considered to be. This, mixed with the fact that it was still being made by the Valve, was enough to catch the attention of fans who already enjoy digital TCGs like this. Then they released the beta. This was a closed beta, only accessible to content creators and esports players who had made names for themselves in other digital TCGs. So, let's go over the gameplay. Seeing Hearthstone's success with streamlining and simplifying TCG gameplay for the video game medium, one might assume that Valve would take a similar approach, and you'd be wrong. Valve wanted a digital TCG with all the depth of a traditional card game. No, even more depth. This was going to be the deepest, most mechanically loaded TCG you can imagine. Something that'll really have esports players foaming at the mouth. So, we start with our traditional formula. Custom built decks, mana, and lowering the opponent health to 0. But you know what? This is too simple. What if you were playing 3 games at once? Taking inspiration from Dota, you would have 3 lanes. Each lane would have its own mana pool that would fully replenish and increase by 1 each turn. Each lane would also have its own tower. Your goal is to attack the tower, eventually destroying it and turning it into an ancient. If you do this twice, you win. Alternatively, if you render a tower to an ancient and then destroy the ancient, you would also win. Each player brings 5 heroes. These are your main attackers, who you supplement with weaker cards called creeps, as well as spells and items. The game is separated into stages. The first is the action phase, in which players alternate playing one card or ability at a time per lane, until both players pass consecutively. You then enter the combat phase, where your units strike their targeted enemies or the opposing tower if no blocker is present. With each enemy you kill, you gain gold, which you can use in the following shopping phase to buy equipment and stat boosts to effectively upgrade your heroes. After this is the deployment phase. You see, when your heroes die, they actually respawn after 2 turns. This phase is when you would redeploy said heroes. I would like to stress that I've been following the same rule each time I've explained these games' mechanics, of trying to explain them in as simple terms as possible. Most of the reason I even described the prior games was in the hopes to give you a proper frame of reference for how insane this game is. With all that being said, you can probably imagine that this game had a hellacious learning curve, something that would be a focus of critique. With that, pretty much all the people given access to the beta arrived at a similar conclusion. The game had an incredible foundation and tons of potential, but the current game lacked balance and polish. And despite spending a full year in this beta, seemingly none of these issues were addressed. Still, Valve attempted to recover. They would hold a tournament at PAX West, marking the first time that the game would be publicly playable. They would hold another tournament before the game's release, with a massive 128 players and a $10,000 prize pool. They even published 2 webcomics to coincide with the game's release, and gave anyone who played it a free month of Dota Plus. They were truly pulling everything out of their tried and true playbook, but it didn't work. The game was released in November of 2018 to poor reception. The general public felt similar to the people that had participated in the closed beta. The gameplay was there. It had potential. It just needed fine-tuning. But there was another much bigger issue that would drive this game's downfall. Remember how Valve made a big point about this game avoiding the monetization practices of its competitors? How it would charge up front for a copy of the game and steer clear of any pay-to-win elements? Yeah, I just straight up didn't do any of that. Like, I wish I could do a more elaborate setup and dramatic curtain pull, but I really can't. They just lied. One aspect was true. The game did charge $20 instead of being free to play like Hearthstone, but from there, it was probably the most pay-to-win game ever made. That's hardly an exaggeration. You want more cards? Well, you have 2 options. You can buy a pack using real money, or you can earn one by participating in events. That doesn't sound so bad, right? Wrong. Because to play in said events, you had to pay real money. Literally the only ways to get cards and therefore build your decks and therefore compete with other players was to open your wallet, in a game that you already paid for. There was one other way to get cards though. Remember how Hearthstone made a point to not include player-to-player trading to avoid a chaotic card market? Well, Artifact did allow players to buy and sell cards directly from one another through the Steam marketplace. This went about as well as Blizzard predicted. The most commonly used cards would immediately shoot up to over $20 a pop. If you were just comparing this to Magic or Hearthstone, this wouldn't be that bad. The issue is that the players didn't see it that way. They just saw that they had to spend more than the cost of the game on a single card. There are some other gripes. For example, this game was released back when people still cared about having offline content in their games. So some people didn't like that Artifact was online only. As you can imagine, the game was a massive failure. It had a concurrent player count of about 60,000 at launch, which in the span of just 2 months would drop to 1,500, a 95% decrease. By July of 2019, that number would sit at just 100 players. In March of 2019, Valve would have a few layoffs. Among them, unsurprisingly, were Richard Garfield and Scaff Elias. Despite this, both men still believed in Artifact and would continue to offer consultation to Valve pro bono. And seemingly their sentiment was shared by Gabe Newell, who in 2020 announced that Valve was starting on a rework of Artifact, meant to address all the issues players had with the gameplay and, more importantly, the monetization. They called it Artifact 2.0. The game would fully remove the buying and selling of cards through Steam Marketplace, add an offline campaign, and heavily rework the gameplay. It was everything the fans had asked for. Once again, Valve sat on Artifact in a position that all logic pointed to succeeding. Then they released the beta. Those who played it were on the fence about the gameplay changes, feeling it too far removed from the original game. Of course, the bigger issue was the lack of people who played it in the first place. The beta simply failed to attract players. And in March of 2021, it was announced that all development on Artifact 2.0 had been cancelled. Its beta, as well as the original game, would be made freeware, available to all. And that is where our story lies today. A game that even the prestige of Valve failed to save, not just once, but twice. Valve's biggest and second biggest failure. The main minds behind the game still hold a positive sentiment towards it today. Gabe Newell would remain firm that he believed it to be a strong product. Richard Garfield would blame the failure on early review bombing over the game's monetization, claiming that it prevented the card market from stabilizing to a point where it was in line with competitors like Hearthstone. They seem to believe that the game just didn't get the chance it deserved. Regardless, Artifact is the one time Valve's magic didn't work, and I think that stands as a reminder that even giants can stumble when they forget what made them great. So, what do you think? Do you believe Artifact's failure was simply the outcome of corporate greed? Or was it treated unfairly and deprived of a proper chance at success? Let me know in the comment section down below, and feel free to do all the other YouTube stuff while you're down there. If you've made it this far into the video, with the utmost sincerity, thank you, and I will see you around. Bye.